Imagine abandoning the sterile, brightly lit, completely predictable corridors of a United States children's hospital.
Right, a totally safe environment.
Exactly. And leaving all that to live in a freezing, muddy, incredibly remote camp in the mountainous jungles of Central Africa.
It is an extreme pivot.
It really is. And now, imagine that choice ending in your brutal, unsolved murder.
Yeah.
Like, how does a healthcare worker caring for kids become, a militant misanthrope and eventually a target for assassination?
It is one of the most drastic, jarring, and ultimately fatal life pivots imaginable.
Truly.
You don't just wake up one day and decide to wage a one-woman war against humanity in the middle of the jungle without some profound psychological tectonic shifts happening beneath the surface.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are unpacking the fascinating, highly controversial, and tragic life of conservationist Dian Fossey.
Yes, and we have a really incredible source for this.
We do. For you listening, we are relying on a really specific, powerful stack of information surrounding the 1987 biography called Wolfing in the Mists.
Written by the Canadian author and conservationist Farley Mowat.
Right. But we need to set expectations immediately here. If you are picturing a sanitized, saintly biography of a pristine nature hero.
The kind where birds just land on her shoulders while she sings.
Exactly that kind. If that's what you're picturing, you need to throw that image out the window right now.
Far out the window. Mowat's book is vital because it refuses to look away from the messy reality of conservation.
Yeah, it's not a fairy tale.
Not at all. We are talking about dark corporate intrigue, massive government friction, and personality so intense, so rigid and uncompromising that she ended up alienating almost every single person who tried to work with her.
I am just naturally curious about how a radical life shift like this even happens in the first place.
Right. Where does it start?
Yeah, because you don't just accidentally end up in the mist-shrouded mountains of Rwanda.
Huh?
If you're working a safe, secure job in the U.S., what triggers that kind of total transformation?
To understand that, we really have to look at the sheer force of her will. Because the origin story is where the friction really begins.
Okay.
As you mentioned, in the late 1950s, Fossey was working in a children's hospital in the U.S. She wasn't an established field researcher.
She didn't have the academic pedigree.
Right. She had absolutely no formal background in zoology or anthropology, but she develops this overwhelming fixation on wanting to become a field anthropologist.
Wait, I need to pause you there.
Sure.
Because if you have zero field experience, you don't just walk into a jungle and start doing high-level observational science.
No, you definitely don't.
So how did she even get her foot in the door?
She practically forced the door open. The major catalyst comes in 1960. She manages, through just sheer persistence, to land an interview with Louis Leakey.
Oh.
Yeah, and for context, in the 1960s, Leakey wasn't just a scientist. He was an absolute kingmaker in the world of anthropology.
Like if he pointed at you and said, go to Africa, your life changed forever.
Exactly. And he is the one who ultimately encourages her to go study the mountain gorillas of Central Africa firsthand.
And she just goes for it.
She does.
But the sources note, she does this entirely against the wishes of her friends and her family. They are practically begging her not to do this.
Yeah, they were terrified for her.
And she just tunes them out completely. It's like leaving a secure, predictable desk job to become a frontline soldier in a wilderness war zone.
That's a great way to put it.
It defies all conventional self-preservation.
So what was it about her underlying character that allowed her to just casually ignore all those warnings from the people who loved her and just completely abandon her old life?
Well, what's fascinating here is how Farley Mowat interprets that exact decision in the biography.
He asserts that this leap, this cold willingness to just cut ties, ignore every red flag, and walk into the absolute unknown against everyone's advice. It perfectly illustrates the immense strength of character that defined her.
Right.
It is the very trait that made her a global icon. But Mowat is very careful to point out that this exact same rigid, unyielding strength of character is the mechanism that likely sealed her doom.
Because if you have the kind of personality that can just ghost your family's concerns, you probably aren't great at compromising in other areas of your life either.
Precisely. You can't be that headstrong without breaking things along the way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Initially, though, it didn't look like a tragedy in the making. At first, the sources note she seemed destined to follow a path very much like Jane Goodall's.
Because Leakey famously backed Goodall as well, right?
Exactly. Fossey was on track to become a highly successful traditional scientist, doing this groundbreaking impartial observational work with the gorillas.
By systematically alienating everyone, though, she didn't stay a traditional impartial scientist.
No, she really didn't.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Hmm.
Because she transitions from an impartial researcher, someone who's taking notes on a clipboard, to this fierce, completely dogmatic conservationist.
A total radicalization.
Yeah. The sources say she made absolutely no attempt to disguise her hatred and contempt for poachers and hunters. How does someone go from just observing animals to actively hating the humans around them?
It happens when observation is no longer enough to protect what you're observing.
Ah, right.
She wasn't just watching these gorillas, she was living with them, bonding with them.
They were her family.
Basically, yes. And then she was watching them get slaughtered by poachers. So the shift from scientist to militant is fueled by immense grief and rage.
It's personal now.
Highly personal. The text is very clear on this. Hatred and contempt are the exact words used. She stopped gathering data and started fighting a literal ground war.
But she wasn't just fighting poachers, was she? I mean, pop culture paints Fossey as this pure environmental the hero who just loved the animals. But the sources suggest her biggest battles were actually with her own research team.
They absolutely were.
Publishers Weekly highlights her mercurial personality, and Mowat's book does not hide the fact that she had a stubborn and difficult personality.
Not at all. And this is where the reality of her daily life in the camp becomes so jarring.
Yeah.
She pushed people away constantly. She had no intimate friends. She became deeply, deeply bitter.
Just totally isolated.
Exactly. Reviewer Stefan Confer, writing for Time magazine, notes that Mowat is scrupulously fair in his portrayal, precisely because he shows Fossey actively antagonizing her own coworkers.
Wow.
She wasn't just difficult, she was volatile. Confer writes that she lurched from tantrum to euphoria and back again.
Think of her personality like a biological immune system that's just in complete overdrive.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, it was so fiercely protective of the gorillas that it started attacking the healthy cells around it. Her own colleagues, the local community, the government officials, literally anyone who tried to help her.
It's great analogy.
And Time magazine goes so far as to outright call her a misanthrope, someone who actively dislikes humankind.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it highlights an incredible tragic paradox of conservation work.
Which is?
You have someone who loves a single species so intensely, with such fierce devotion, that she completely alienates her own species in the process.
A profound self-imposed isolation.
Exactly. And we should point out that it makes perfect sense that Farley Mowat was the one to write this unvarnished account.
Oh, because of his background.
Right. He is the author of Never Cry Wolf. He spent time in the absolute wilderness. He understands the psychological toll of that kind of isolation.
Right. He knows what happens to the human brain when you are separated from society for that long.
He really does.
He could have easily written a fluffy, protective tribute to a fallen colleague, but he chose to tell the truth about her tantrums and her bitterness.
He recognized that her flaws were the actual agent of her story. Her intense feelings were real, but so is her hostility.
It's complicated.
Very. If you are a young researcher sent to her camp, and your boss is lurching from euphoria to screaming tantrums, you aren't going to stay, and you aren't going to protect her.
And that extreme isolation wasn't just sad on a personal level, it had terrifying physical consequences.
It really did.
By systematically alienating the local Rwandan staff, her fellow researchers, and government officials, Fossey didn't just lose friends. She dismantled her own early warning system.
That's exactly what happened.
Because in a remote jungle, your relationships are your security detail. Without alliances, anyone could walk into her camp, which is exactly what happened in December 1985.
Which brings us to the brutal reality of her death. In December 1985, Dian Fossey was murdered in her African camp.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Yeah.
Because when you hear about a conservationist being killed, you immediately assume it was a local poacher who was angry she destroyed a snare.
That's the natural assumption, yes.
But the sources show this escalated from local conflicts in the mud to what sounds like a full-blown international geopolitical thriller.
It absolutely did. The circumstances around her death remain incredibly dark and heavily debated even today.
Right.
The book doesn't claim to solve the case with a smoking gun, but Mowat heavily speculates on the mechanics of the murder. He suggests that an ex-worker may have been hired to carry out the assassination.
Hired by who? I mean, who has the money to fund a hit in the middle of the Rwandan mountains?
Larger corporate interests.
Yeah.
You have to look at the economics of Central Africa in the 1980s.
Go ahead.
The mountains where the guerrillas lived weren't just pristine nature reserves to everyone. They were massive sources of potential revenue.
Oh, of course.
We were talking about lucrative tourism routes, agricultural expansion, and highly organized, well-funded poaching syndicates.
So she wasn't just a nuisance to local hunters. She was a literal roadblock to millions of dollars in profit.
A huge roadblock.
By fiercely protecting the guerrillas and demanding zero human interference, she was standing in the way of massive economic engines. And Time magazine goes even further into the state-level geopolitics of it. They point to convincing accusations of government-sponsored assassins.
Government-sponsored assassins. Let the weight of that sink in for a moment.
It's chilling.
Her militant conservation work was disrupting systems of power and profit so significantly that it may have triggered a coordinated state-level or corporate-level assassination.
Wow.
She wasn't just a scientist anymore. She was treated as an enemy of the state or an enemy of commerce.
But then Time makes a concession that is just, it's chilling, honestly. They concede that Fossey's misanthropy essentially made her an accessory to the crime of her own murder.
And this raises an important question for you to consider as you listen. Did her complete inability to play politics, her utter refusal to maintain alliances, ultimately cost her her life?
That's the million-dollar question.
If she had built bridges with the local government, if she had compromised even slightly to allow some regulated tourism, would she have had the institutional protection she needed to survive?
But instead, she pushed everyone away.
She did.
When you alienate your coworkers, when you have no intimate friends to watch your back, you dismantle your own safety net.
Yeah.
Her absolute dogmatic nature was her greatest superpower. I mean, it's the only reason the mountain gorillas survived when no one else was fighting for them.
True.
But it was also her fatal flaw. It left her entirely alone in a remote cabin, surrounded by enemies she had openly, verbally, and physically despised.
She made herself a barrier to profit, and through her own psychological rigidity, she ensured she was a barrier standing completely by herself. She made it incredibly easy for her enemies to reach her.
It is such a violent, dark end to her life. With her life ending so abruptly, we have to look at how history and literature have judged her legacy since that night in 1985.
Right.
Which brings us to the reception of Mowat's biography itself, which came out in 1987, just 2 years after her murder.
The timing of the book is crucial. The wounds were still incredibly fresh in the scientific community, and you might recognize the title format. Mowat called his biography Woman in the Mists.
Which is a direct play on Fossey's own 1983 book, Gorillas in the Mist.
Exactly.
And for most people, that title probably rings a bell because it inspired the very famous 1988 film starring Sigourney Weaver.
Right, a huge movie.
But the movie, while powerful, often leans into that Hollywood hero narrative. Mowat's book, according to the reviews we have, is a much grittier experience.
It absolutely is. When it was released, Publishers Weekly described it as a gripping story from beginning to gruesome end.
Gruesome end.
Wow. Yeah, they specifically highlighted that it wasn't a dry scientific text. It was filled with drama, intrigue, and even love affairs.
It reads like a novel.
It does. They argued that her highly volatile, mercurial personality is exactly what elevates the book. It gives it a much wider audience than you would typically find in the standard nature adventure genre.
Because it's a psychological thriller as much as it is a biology book.
Exactly.
Frank Reiser, writing in the Library Journal, called the book essential reading. But he said it's essential for a very specific, profound reason. He wrote that it is essential for all who understand the sacrifice of self for the preservation of other species.
Sacrifice of self. That is an incredibly heavy phrase, especially given how she died.
So what does this all mean? If you are listening right now and you are deeply passionate about a cause, whether it's environmental, political, or social, why does Fossey's specific messy story matter to you?
It matters because it perfectly synthesizes the dual themes of any grand consuming crusade.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Well, on one hand, you have the undeniable objective importance of preserving the mountain gorillas. That was a cause that Mowat himself deeply believed in, and it is a battle that Fossey definitively helped win.
Right.
The gorillas are still there because of her. But on the other hand, you have the devastating, often ignored, personal toll it takes on the individual fighting that battle.
The human cost of extreme activism.
Yes. Looking at multiple perspectives, seeing Fossey as a literal savior to the guerrillas, but simultaneously as a terror to her colleagues and a militant misanthrope, it enriches our understanding of what real, boots-on-the-ground activism actually looks like.
It's not a Disney movie.
No, it is almost never clean. It is rarely polite.
It's definitely not a sterile children's hospital corridor.
Far from it.
It requires you to get your hands dirty, and sometimes it requires a level of obsession that most of us can't even fathom.
But as we've seen, that level of obsession has a terrifying dark side. When you stop seeing the humanity in the people around you, you lose the very connections that keep you grounded, and more importantly, keep you safe.
And that brings us to the core of what we've uncovered today. We've been tracing the incredible, completely contradictory life of Dian Fossey through the lens of Farley Mowat's Woman in the Mists.
A really wild journey.
We started with a woman who defied every expectation, leaving the safety of a hospital to go save a species in the African jungle. She did exactly what she set out to do.
She did.
But in the process, her passion curdled into a bitter war against humanity itself. She made powerful enemies of poachers, massive corporate interest, and her own peers.
Yeah.
And ultimately, she paid the absolute ultimate price for that self-imposed isolation in December of 1985.
She successfully saved the mountain gorillas from extinction, but she systematically destroyed every mechanism that could have saved herself.
Which leaves us with a lingering thought for you to mull over long after this deep dive ends. Think back to that quote from Frank Reiser in the Library Journal. He praised Fossey's sacrifice of self for the preservation of other species.
It's a powerful quote.
On paper, that sounds incredibly noble. It sounds heroic. But looking closely at her tragic end, looking at her total lack of intimate friends, the bitter isolation she built around herself, and the fact that she was murdered alone in the dark.
Oh, you mean murdered alone in the dark?
Right, exactly. At what point does a noble sacrifice of self morph into a self-destructive obsession? An obsession that might actually endanger the longevity of the very cause you are fighting for.
If you alienate everyone who could carry on your work, where exactly is the line between world-changing passion and fatal obsession?
That's the question you have to ask yourself.
Yeah.
Because stepping out of the safe, sterile corridors of a normal life to fight for what you believe in can absolutely change the world.
Absolutely.
But if you aren't careful, if you burn every bridge to the people around you, the wilderness you run into might just swallow you whole.